This episode of Simulation Nation is brought to you by Avkin, your one-stop shop for everything wearable simulator and standardized patients.
Hey, I just want to make sure that everybody knows who we are interviewing today. This is Bethany McGonigle, aka my daughter, my youngest daughter. I really asked her to come today in order for us to better understand from a theatrical perspective the world of SPs. And so really it's the focus of this podcast is going to be on what to do to help your SPs stay in character. It's so important that SPs do stay in character throughout the entire simulation, because if not, it becomes very much like the mannequins where it's like, is this real or is it not real? And the students or the learners become confused. So, Bethany has a background in theater. She has a degree in theater from Palm Beach Atlantic University. I should know that off the top of my head. From Palm Beach Atlantic University. And she's really added a lot of really fine nuances to what we do here at Avkin as the SP coordinator. So I wanted to ask her some questions to help those other educators that are like me that don't have a background in theater or don't really have any knowledge of it. How can they help their SPs give the best possible performance for the best possible outcomes for the learners? So anything else that I missed in that intro, Bethany, that you'd like to say about yourself or what we're doing?
I think you got it down.
Yeah. She has been an SP since she's been about, 12?
13.
13. So we got her involved in some of the pediatric SPs at a local children's hospital, I think, was it right?
Yeah.
And that's what got her love. I think she loved theater before that, but that gave her a little bit more of the bug.
I loved being dramatic before that. And then I found out there's a really cool way I could channel it.
Yeah. And much more believable.
Yeah.
So, just thinking up, quickly, as a educator, if they don't have theatrical background, if they're more healthcare focused, what can they do? What are some of the things that they can do to help keep, to ensure that their SPs are staying in character?
Well, I think the biggest culprit of an SP getting out of character is that they're not authentically representing the character in like a full capacity as a full person. And really the biggest thing that you can do to help that is by adding a really detailed character description. So if you give them a detailed character description where they can have a really good general understanding, a full understanding of who this person is supposed to be, then they can play the character much more authentically and they can kind of dive into that world full force. Yeah, so it really helps just kind of get a full picture.
Yeah, so I can give a couple examples. So, typically in simulations, whether you write them yourself, in healthcare simulations, whether you write them yourself or whether you purchase them, there's typically about a paragraph about the patient. Patient's a 43-year-old male that just got discharged from the hospital with a new diagnosis of COPD or whatever it is. And there's very little about who that person is. That cannot be enough information. You can't possibly expect that you're going to get an authentic portrayal, especially a consistently authentic portrayal, because what ends up happening with that in that situation is they just take that information and then they create the character in their head, and it may or may not be what you were expecting it to be. So tons and tons of detail. If you download our free simulation that's on Avkin, there's a free download. You can see the detail of the character description. And I think the other big important thing of this is don't think that you just need to be describing what's going on with them right then and there. It's like what was their childhood like? What kind of parental, what was their family structure like? What is their current support system? All of those things need to be included so that the person that's portraying the patient or family member has a really complete, rounded bit of information.
Yeah.
Would you say that's?
Yeah, and I think we really nailed the nail on the head.
Hit the nail on the head. Is what you're supposed to.
I think you really.
That's right.
Yeah, there you go. That you really hit the nail on the head with saying that you need to have really kind of what did they grow up in? Because I think we all were shaped so differently, and something that was said to me during my schooling that's really stuck with me is that everyone has a different understanding of like what it is to have a mom. Like my image of what my mom is very different than what your image of what your mom is. So it's just like being very descriptive of whatever that kind of looks like for them, especially with support system if they're getting hard news, Do they have people they can fall back on? I always say it's nice to have like at least one or two people, whether that be like a friend or, you know, a family member. It's kind of nice to have at least someone that they can fall back on, because most people do have someone in their life that they can depend on. But giving that kind of full rounded view is very important.
Yeah, and I again, one other thing I'll say with this, and it doesn't exactly relate to what we're talking about, but the one other thing that really we struggled with one particular scenario was there was a child abuse case, and the SP was actually the support person for this disabled pediatric mannequin. It was a child that was disabled, and they were bringing the child in because they had a feeding tube that needed to be addressed, but there was also some bruises on the patient. And it was never disclosed who the abuser was to the SP. They knew they weren't, but they didn't know who it was. And what happened was it came off as inauthentic, that because they did, like, in their mind, their conscience wasn't clear because they didn't know who it was. So the scenario for the first semester changed, where they were actually being removed from the simulation because they thought that they were the potential abuser. Yeah. So even if you don't, like, even if it's not them, just identify who it is. Is it the parents? Is it a kid in the classroom that's being a bully? Who is it? So that they can basically have their conscience cleared, because the nonverbals weren't matching. And so I think that's really important too, is like, if you have anything where there's a potential of like guilt or incrimination in some way, make sure that you are giving them the ability to know, even if they don't ever disclose it, that is put in the content. And once we put that in, the simulation went back. It was really interesting. It was really, really interesting.
Well, then it affects standardization and everything right after it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, we just, that semester, the objectives didn't necessarily all get met because they weren't interviewing the parent teacher. I don't know, I forget what they call it, but the teacher's assistant, essentially. They weren't interviewing them for more information. So again, it's just one of those things of, you don't realize it sometimes. We ran the pilot, but once we went through the sim, it didn't land the first semester. So thinking about if they are, and this has happened to me a few times, but if you have a simulation that's running and the person that is portraying, the SP, is having difficulty getting into character, what are some of the things that you can do to help them?
I think one of the biggest things is to kind of have, so when you think of athletes, right? Like, you think of every time that before they throw like a free throw shot, they have a ritual that they do, right? There's something that's like a physical movement that helps them get back into the headspace that they need to be in. With acting, I think you can do the same thing. I found a lot of success with this, especially if it's a hard character. Someone is very different than yourself. So for example, like, we have a suicidal ideation simulation. And for that one, it's a really, you have to change who you are yourself a lot to get into it.
And even the physicality of it.
Yeah. So it's like doing something where it's like, again, whatever, if you want to make it like that character has a nervous tick or something like that. So like, if that's like whatever, twisting my rings, right? So it's like, that's what I'm doing. And I'm doing that for the minutes before we lead up to sim, because I need to be getting into that character. So it's kind of having something that you can do physically, if that's
almost like a trigger.
Yeah, kind of like a trigger, something that gets you, okay, I'm back in this headspace, or I'm getting into this area. Mm-hmm. It just really, it's not necessarily for all characters, especially if it's not a particularly hard sim, but it is something that's really nice to have to lean back on. If you're, again, even if you're doing a full day of sim and you've been doing it again and again and again, it's nice as something where it's like a refresher, right? It's like, okay, we're starting back from square one, and we're doing this thing to help us get back into character.
Yeah, I'll never forget. It was probably maybe even second semester that we ever started with SP. So 2009, and I had a particular SP, and the scenario was a traumatic brain injured patient. So the patient obviously was slow as far as their mentation. And between simulations, I had a couple minutes, which normally doesn't happen, but I was in there switching things out, just chit-chatting with him. And he said, Amy, if you don't mind, if you could just finish up whatever you need to do and leave, because I need to get into the headspace of this patient. And I was like, oh, wow, like this is real. Like, they really do spend time like getting into character and thinking about who this person is. And again, very believable presentation of a patient with traumatic brain injury. And, again, it was for me, when I was doing those first semesters of Sims, I was like, this is exactly what I wanted all along for my students. So I was all about letting them have the headspace. The other thing is, I think that a big one that I noticed was if you have parents, if it's a pediatric scenario and you have parents that are supposed to be in the room, or even if you have a loved one that's in with an SP, that they're already talking about, what's going on at home. Like the dogs got away yesterday, or the trash needs to be taken out, or, hey, they didn't pick up the trash. Like you're just talking about what would happen on a normal scenario. Or like, again, a normal, a situation that would be happening that would be relevant, so that they can also get into the headspace. But that's happening even before the students walk in the room.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you're interrupting their conversation. The learners are interrupting their conversation, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
Because it does make it so much more believable, because that's exactly what happens in real life, right?
Yeah. Well, it's like there's a quote by Meisner, and he says, "Why do we get
Who's
on?"
Meisner? We don't all know this stuff.
Sorry, there's a quote from someone who is a foundational teacher of theater, and we study him, in school and stuff like that. But he has a very famous quote that says, "Why do we get on stage and stop being human?" And it's kind of like that same thought of like, no, we're gonna just be human this whole time, and that's how you get a really authentic performance, which is, it's really easy for, to just fall back into that like normal pattern. Again, it's like a husband and wife, if they're talking about, their pediatric, son that's in the hospital. It's like, what are the conversations that would normally be happening? And just having those helps so much of like, we're going to now be entering into this world. You know what I mean? I don't know how else to say that, but it's just like, we're going to now be our most authentic human selves within these boundaries, within this world that we've created.
Yeah. And I think that it's still, again, portraying that believability, even if there's tension in a married couple, right, that can be felt in the room, right? It should be able to be felt. Yeah. And the whole idea of being human is that everything isn't always puppies and rainbows, right? And everything isn't always comfortable, and relationships are messy. And so again, giving those opportunities for your learners to experience that in simulation and really be able to talk through, how do you deal with some of those things? So that's great. So what if people who are, in the SP pool are not necessarily trained actors? Like, obviously you're highly skilled and amazing, but we've had students, so as a background, just so everybody knows, we actually taught a class at the university that I taught. So the SPs were actually students at the university, typically undergraduate students at the university. So when I say students, sometimes it gets interchanged. But what happens if someone who is portraying the role is not necessarily in the theater program, or has a huge affinity for theater, but they are a willing SP and they are excited about the opportunity, but maybe don't have as much training?
Yeah. So the easiest way to go about this, in my personal opinion, is to just not give them anything too silly, too crazy, too out there. Because when it is someone who is like student to student, or like, peers, they know each other, it really, like, don't give them an accent. You know what I mean? Because it's like they know them in real life usually.
So you're talking about like in a role play situation where maybe the senior students are helping the junior students?
Yeah. So it's like not giving them like, an accent or anything like super crazy for them to do is usually really helpful, because if you know me, as I talk like this every day, and then I start talking like this, and I'm telling you all about how I got high blood pressure right now. Like, it's just, they're going to be like, what? Like, you know what I mean? Because they know them. So instead, just giving them a much more like mellowed out character, whatever that needs to be. And then saving your more, very characterized characters for, either actors or other students who don't know each other can do that as well. But if you have a peer-to-peer where they do know each other, just making sure that you're not doing something crazy outlandish, because either they won't want to do it, right? So they'll just be like, oh, I'm supposed to have a Southern accent for this? okay. It's like, you know what I mean?
Right? And they might start with the first 2 sentences and then go out with a southern accent
because they're not
completely.
trained. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, don't do anything where it needs to be too much of anything, in my opinion.
Okay, and the other thing that I would say from that is also give them warm-up roles.
Oh yeah.
So if you can let them see, because some of our SPs who didn't have acting background. I mean, we had one chemistry student. You would think that he did not have a high affinity for acting, but he really bloomed in the course of that semester. And so we started off. We had a psychotic break simulation, and he started off with being the family member, which is much more of a rational human being who is, please help my loved one, and very concerned for the loved one. And, very detailed story of who this person was, but also of who their family member was that had this psychotic break. And the setting is an emergency department. But then because he grew and he was ready to be challenged as the semester unfolded, he ended up being able to portray one of the psychiatric patients. Yeah. So there is the ability to kind of let them get a feel for what's going on in the room as a family member, maybe, or, thinking about even if you are doing mannequin simulation. Again, I hope you move to SP stuff because that's our passion and that's our drive. But I also had our SPs in the beginning be family members of an adult mannequin, right? So even if it's that role where I'm the granddaughter of this patient, or I am the neighbor, whatever it is, that would be believable, that you're giving them something to kind of warm up and see how they do. And then you might be able to give them more challenging cases as the semester or as the time goes on.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm trying to say, is give them something that they have more of a connection to, give them something close, and then you can wean them out into something much more characterized.
If they're willing.
If they're willing and if they're able.
Yeah.
Allowing them to kind of slowly grow into that role instead of just jumping them into the deep end.
Yeah. And I would also say, you can voluntold people to do things, but you're not necessarily always going to get the quality that you would want. So making sure that you have someone that is in that role play scenario that is willing to. So think of maybe you have honor students that need an honors program, and so they might be willing to do a simulation with you that involves, an SP. Or if you had students that they had two choices, either they were doing this, think of community service, like this community service activity, or they were doing this community service activity where it had similar objectives or goals or whatever the case may be. So I think that, again, thinking about how you want to do this, it's better to have willing volunteers than people that are being forced to do it. In other words, there's a group of, 6 nursing students that are coming in to do the sim. One of them is the grandchild, and you're giving them, their paperwork. That's a little tough because they may or may not be really strong with their skills or have confidence. I know I personally had zero confidence in my acting ability until we were doing a dress rehearsal, and I was the mom of a child that drowned. And it was just a dress rehearsal. I did do that sim, but I just did a dress rehearsal. I was just the stand-in, and I made our theater faculty cry with my portrayal. And once I was like, oh, I really can act. But again, it wasn't too far from myself because I am a mother. I've never had a child drowning, but I can imagine how I would react and what would be believable. But it gave me the confidence to do the other sims. She says, oh, you did that sim? Because we have done sims together. But it gave me the confidence to do the next sims where I was actually, the SP in a simulation. So having those test kind of runs is really helpful, and giving them the confidence, I think we also did a lot of coaching, and I think they felt confident because they knew that there was somebody that was going to help them with improving. Again, ours was a course, so we definitely wanted to focus on making sure that they improved over time. And we got new students every semester. So, most people have an SP pool, and that SP pool stays fairly consistent, but that was not the situation for us. So as far as exercises, we talked about kind of getting mentally into the simulation. Is there other things that we can do in order to again, I don't know, Meisner. Did Meisner give us any advice? Maybe Uta Hagen. I love saying the name Uta Hagen in case anybody wonders, but that's the most amazing name in the whole world. And that's two different words, Uta Hagen. That's her name. She's has a philosophy on acting. Would that be the right philosophical acting?
She's another acting teacher. She has 9 questions that we often refer to as standardization. Yes. We have a resource about it if you want to look it up, but it's a resource to help with standardization. Yeah, love good old Uta. But so as far as exercises go, something, if we're talking about staying in character, and again, we talked about staying in character, you have to be authentic in the character. That means you have to live in the character. Something that I found is spending the day as the character.
Yeah, that's a great one.
It's a fun one. So I was doing a role where I had to have a New York Jewish accent, and I couldn't get it. I was spending like a month where I was just trying to get this accent to be consistent in all my lines.
This isn't as an SP.
Sorry, this is as an actor. And I couldn't get it just like in my body is what we say, but just like I couldn't get it in my bones. And so I ended up speaking in this New York Jewish accent for like 3 weeks. That's just how I talked. Like I just talked that way every day. People would often ask about it. I'd have to explain myself. But just living in that accent allowed for me to easily access it, tap into it. I could easily do it. So if you have a character that you're having a really hard time, like living in that character, try actually living in the character for an extended period of time so that it makes it easier to just jump in and stay in that character.
Yeah. And so for simulationists, what I would do in that situation is I would give them a preparatory assignment. I would ask them to, if they had cerebral palsy, that they would use those crutches, and they would use those crutches to walk down on Main Street, or they would use them if it was a Muslim woman, that she would put a hijab on and go out and, make purchases, or, again, interact with people within the community, so they could understand how these people were being received. People, because they're people different than themselves. And so you want to make sure that they're representing them well. Or if it's a challenging character, if you think about a patient who's depressed, you don't want them to spend gobs of time in a depressed state, but it does help them to work on their lack of eye contact. They're not smiling, not necessarily being super verbal, whatever you have created as far as the character. But asking your SPs to spend time in preparation, especially if they're fairly novice at it, will help them have a more authentic portrayal and be prepared when they walk in the door to do whatever they need to do. Is there any other thoughts or anything that you would add to that other than those kind of comments?
About this specifically, living a life in the...
Well, just if somebody's struggling to get into the character, I would say also look at your character description to make sure that you have enough detail. Having someone who is more experienced as an SP reading through it to make sure that you're thinking about check it from all sides, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I think, and you don't know the plot holes until you run it. And then it's like having your SPs be a part of the feedback session, right? So it's like when you are making improvements to the sim, having, an SP who played that role who's like, oh, well, I was a little confused about this specific section of it, or I did this with all the dress rehearsals I ever done with my SPs. It's always like, all right, what questions do you have? And they're always like, well, it says 2 weeks here and it says 3 weeks here. So is it 2 weeks? Or is it like, oh, I didn't even notice that. Okay, we're 2 weeks and I'll fix it. So just like small stuff like that, even while they are reading through it, they see things so much clearer. So having them be a part of that feedback session for when you are updating your simulations.
Okay. So anything that you have seen that hasn't been taught in a classroom that you think has especially worked in Sims?
I think simulation is such a special place that it's so...
You see how she lights up when she says that? That just makes me so happy that she loves it as much as I do.
It's funny because, again, I mean, we talked about this in the beginning, but my love for theater spawned from Sim. And I feel like that's so not the typical route that people go. It's like people usually are in college and then are like, oh, what is this? Okay, let me go into it. And so it's like, since I feel like I started with SP work and then moved into theater work, it was so different for me than the normal person. But I mean, I just have such a love for it. But the improv techniques, I think, are something that really is so different in the classroom versus in sim, because in the classroom for improv, they always teach you, you have to know about your character, you have to know about your relationship, your objective, and where you are, your location. Because it usually improv is very short, it's very small. But for a simulation, you have all those things in your character description, so you're ready to go from the start of it, and it's just much more extended. So doing like the improv in simulation, where you can just live in the world of the character. Just again, I don't even know a different way to say it, but just allow yourself to not be yourself for that time.
So Zach Jackson, the same guy that asked me to leave the room to get into the headspace of the traumatic brain injury patient, it also, what he said, and he had some acting skills clearly because he was understanding that, but he said, it's as if you're doing a play and you have the script, but nobody else does. So that the improv isn't necessarily coming from what you're trying to think through as what would be believable for this character that you haven't already gotten, because you've gotten most of the content, but you're also having to respond as that person to a group of learners, and then a second group of learners, and then a third, fourth, fifth, sixth. So the no scenario is exactly the same, because it depends on how those learners make the decisions that they make, the interactions that they have, the verbals, the nonverbals. So that character is being tested in multiple different ways and in multiple different avenues.
Yeah.
And it allows you to really kind of, like you said, have the full extent of that character. So it's not just a scripted play. It's literally that you are reacting in real time as that person. And then also working on giving feedback.
Yeah. And you're also always restarting to the same spot in that person's life.
Yeah.
It's just like, I always imagine like a clip, like on a movie. It's just like, it rewinds, and then we're starting from the exact same place, completely different outcome.
Yeah. So years ago, I used to describe it as Groundhog Day, the movie Groundhog Day, where it would just repeat, but it would be, every day would be slightly different, right? Mm-hmm. But not everybody has watched the movie Groundhog Day nowadays, so you can't necessarily describe it that way. But great analogy, right? Where you're just...
It's a great movie. I love that movie. Being from Central PA, too, it just, like, hits home.
It's Will Ferrell.
It's not Will Ferrell.
Tom
Hanks.
It's Tom Hanks, yeah. It's not Will Ferrell, but Tom Hanks.
I mean, it's a
curly-haired guy. I don't know why I was thinking
definitely curly-haired, but I'm pretty sure it's Tom Hanks.
Yeah. We'll have to look this
up.
You
have to
look this up.
Check it out, because I feel like I don't think it's Tom Hanks. But
who's the guy from Ghostbusters?
I don't know Ghostbusters.
Hold on.
I wasn't allowed to watch that.
You're gonna know the name as soon as I pull it up. Groundhog.
Okay, we'll move on, and then you can come back to that.
Yep, it's
producer Nate.
Well, I do have it.
Okay.
Bill Murray.
Yep. That's who it is.
That's pretty. Sorry, Tom Hanks. I mean,
Tomato.
Yeah, it's close to Will Ferrell too.
All SNL people.
Yeah, true. That's probably exactly what it was. So one of the things I think that as a simulationist that made me have angst is if somebody did break character. And I will have to say that I think that the learners work hard to break the character in the simulation, because they want the tension to be broken or the uncomfortableness to be broken. One of the things that my theater partner used to always say is that they're going to walk into the room and look for a wink and a nod from the SP so that they feel relieved of their, stress or tension. And from my perspective, we did both graduate and undergraduate. I feel like it happened more in the graduate program than it did in the undergraduate program, because they would, it's a health visit, right? So they would complete the health visit, and then they would look at the SP and they'd say, "Are we done yet?" Right? Because they don't know what to do. They haven't, again, pre-briefing, probably should have done a better job as like, when you complete it as if you're done, and walk out of the room to write your note. But in the beginning, when we were just learning, they would say things like that. And it, we taught the SPs, okay, in character 100% of the time.
I don't know, are you?
Yeah. And that's exactly the response that they got, because we had taught them that from the course that we taught. But how do you overcome the idea of a character being broken or?
The biggest thing is to just respond to it how a normal human would respond to it. So again, I've been in simulations where people would laugh and it's like, why? What's funny? Like I'm sorry. Like I'm telling you that I am hurt. Or I'm telling you my son is, and then it was always like, oh, okay, yeah. So let's talk. So it's just responding as if they were actually in situations.
Right.
And then again, that's a point that you can bring up for feedback, right? Of like, when you did laugh, that was a moment where the mother felt, whatever it is. But it's really kind of giving that authentic reaction of not giving them a wink and a nod. Because if you give them a wink and a nod, then derailed. You know what I mean? Then it is like this, like, oh, it's fake. But it's not as important. And I don't feel like it's taken as seriously, as if when you just keep going with it.
And think about, what we would always teach them is think about how the character would respond. So if you are doing the patient that is suicidal, you're not going to be as aggressive, right? But you may become more inward, and less responsive and not really willing to share too much information because they don't feel safe. And I think that it is, if you have a mother who's got a child that's injured or hurt, they're going to be a mama bear, I mean, that's just that's probably the situation, but that they would respond as how their character would respond. And I think that it's really important. And what we would teach the SPs is until you hear overhead, because we had the microphones overhead, until you hear the simulation is completed, you are in character 100% of the time. The other thing that I would do is just because of the proximity of the control room, our control room's right next to our simulation rooms, I would tell them you're going to hear a knock at the door. That will be me knocking to go into the control room. The students are just taking a couple minutes or the learners are just taking a couple minutes to get situated. The next knock you hear will be the learners entering the room. So they knew, okay, that's a cue that next person coming, so that they weren't on their phones or doing something. They knew that when the knock came, the second knock came. So there was things that we did that were internal communications that helped them to know when things were, so that they weren't caught out of character or whatever. And also, if you think about with psychotic break, it takes so much energy to be, in constant motion and not necessarily accepting limits. So that would not, once I knocked, that's when they would really start or begin the simulation, so that the family member who was there is lucid could be there with the loved one. Then when they enter, they're reacting and responding. So the other piece of that is, like, if you have a high energy character, they're not necessarily having to do it for 20 minutes while you're doing your pre-briefing. They're having just a couple of minutes while the students are preparing for entering the room.
But something that I always say too is whenever we did virtual simulation and people would have dogs or, cats jump up on the screen, and they were just like, I'm so sorry that happened. Like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, like, that my dog, like, what do he's barking. It's like, how would you respond if you're on a telehealth visit and your dog was barking? Like, there's nothing in the character description that says you don't have a dog. You can have a dog. So it's just like, again, I feel like people are like, oh, when I'm acting, nothing can go wrong, and it has to be the way that it is. And it's like, no, when I go to the hospital, I'm on my phone. Like, I'm scrolling through Instagram. So it's just like, again, it's like you can have these mannerisms that are like, yeah, this is your casual everyday life things, and just use whatever is happening in the environment as like, yeah, this could happen in the environment. How would you respond, instead of it being like a brake in headlights, deer in headlights, are like, oh gosh, that wasn't supposed to happen. It's like, no, it's totally fine. These things just, go on. So, you get a phone call, right? And it's like you're in the middle and you get a phone call on your phone. What are you going to do? It's like, oh no, sorry, that's my dad. Let's move on. You know what I mean? So it's just like, again, just respond to it like a normal person would, because these normal things would happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the idea of standardization and staying in character is something that non-theater people who are needing the SPs to really portray an authentic character are two of the more concerning things, right? And so I think the important thing is that you're able to take these principles and apply them. again, put comments down in the chat. If you have questions, we'd be happy to answer them for you. Again, you obviously can tell that this is our passion. This is what we love doing and talking about. We will also create a simulationist guide for helping your SPs stay in character.
Making sure that your SPs have the freedom to be authentic.
Right.
Give them the parameters, give them the tools that they need through a character description, and let them do what they love.
And make sure you give them a lot of detail.
Yes. Give details.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Bethany. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.